She missed her life-changing interview, chose to help a stranger, and lost everything. But what she didn't know was that her choice would change both their lives forever. Little did she know, the man she saved was the billionaire who held her destiny. Her future depended on an 11 a.m. interview. For the daughter of a janitor, the TechVision Scholarship wasn't just tuition. It was an escape. But a brutal summer storm left her running. Her one good blazer was soaking in the downpour. She was halfway there when she saw him. A middle-aged man struggling alone with a hopelessly flat tire. Her mind screamed to keep walking. This was her one shot, but she stopped. As she knelt in the grit and grease, watching her opportunity disappear. She was unaware of one thing. The man she was helping was a billionaire, and the one man holding the keys to her future. And where in the world are you joining from today? Let me know in the comments below. But before we dive into Miracle's story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing cost you something significant? A moment where choosing character meant sacrificing comfort? If you have, I'd love to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. Let's build a community of people who understand that integrity isn't free. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss the next story about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Let's go. The 7:45 a.m. bus always smelled like diesel fumes and yesterday's coffee. Miracle Johnson sat perfectly still in her seat, her back rigid, just millimeters from the cracked vinyl. She would not let the city's grime touch her today. Today was different. Her blazer was emerald green. It was not new. Her mother, Margaret, had found it at the Crossroads consignment shop 3 weeks ago. It had a small pulled thread on the lapel, which Margaret had expertly mended with matching stitching. Last night, her mother had ironed it twice, pressing the creases sharply and precisely. Miracle, at 18, looked older in the blazer. Her cornrows were braided tightly and pulled back severely. It made her cheekbones look sharper. It made her look composed. It made her look capable. She hoped it made her look worthy. In her coat pocket, her fingers closed around a small brass keychain. It was cool to the touch, worn smooth from decades of holding. It had belonged to her grandmother, Ruby, who had worked as a housekeeper her entire life. Engraved on its worn surface were 5 words. Do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Her grandmother always said that character was the only inheritance that truly mattered. The only thing no one could take away from you, the only thing that actually meant something in the end. The keychain felt like an anchor, grounding her to something larger than her own fear. The bus rattled as it crossed the Westfield Bridge, leaving her neighborhood behind. Below them, the water was murky and sluggish. Westfield was a place of aging apartment buildings with fire escapes, corner stores behind security gates, and families working 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. It was home, but Miracle wanted more. She wanted out. Her mother, Margaret, was a janitor. She cleaned the office towers downtown, the gleaming glass buildings in the financial district. Buildings so tall they seemed to touch the clouds. Margaret left at 5 a.m. each morning, before Miracle woke up, and came home after dark, her hands smelling of industrial cleaners and her back aching from hours bent over floors. Her knuckles were perpetually red and chapped. "You're going to be more than this place," Margaret had whispered to Miracle the night before, her voice rough with exhaustion. She sat on the edge of Miracle's bed, still in her work uniform. "You're going to be more than just a janitor's daughter. You're going to change our lives. You show them who you are tomorrow. You show them the Johnson grit. You earn what's yours." The interview. It was not just an interview. It was the TechVision Scholarship, a full ride to Metropolitan State University, a paid internship at Porter Industries, and a pathway to everything she had dreamed about since she was a child. It was her mother's sacrifice made tangible. It was freedom. The bus lurched forward, and Miracle steadied herself against the pole. Around her, other passengers settled into their seats. Construction workers heading to job sites, nurses ending night shifts, office cleaners like her mother finishing the graveyard circuit. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. Everyone was lost in their own struggle, their own early morning. She checked her phone, 9:15 a.m. The downtown exchange appeared ahead, a blur of glass and steel rising up from the street like a forest of mirrors. The bus wheezed to a stop, and Miracle gathered her portfolio, a worn leather folder containing her application, her transcripts with their perfect 4.0 average, 3 letters of recommendation from teachers who believed in her, and the essay that had taken her weeks to write. The essay about her grandmother's words. The essay about character. The air changed as she stepped off the bus. The neighborhood transformed from cramped and worn to polished and deliberate. Here, the sidewalks were clean. The storefronts displayed expensive goods behind spotless glass. The people wore tailored suits and carried leather briefcases with the ease of people accustomed to belonging. Miracle clutched her portfolio tighter. The crosstown bus stop was 3 blocks away. She checked her watch again, 9:20 a.m. The bus was supposed to arrive within minutes. From there, it was another 15 blocks to Founders Hall at Metropolitan State University. She had done this route a dozen times on practice runs. She knew she could make it. 11 o'clock seemed far away and safe. She waited under the shelter, watching the street. The morning was already hot, the kind of oppressive heat that made the air shimmer. Black clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy, but they seemed distant. Far enough away that she didn't need to worry. The crosstown bus pulled up at 9:25. It was crowded, but not impossible. Miracle boarded, paid her fare, and found a spot near the back. She positioned herself so she could see the street rolling past, watching the familiar landmarks move by. The Porter Industries building, gleaming and rectangular, 40 stories of black glass and arrogance. She thought of her mother somewhere inside that building, on her knees with a cloth and industrial cleaner, making sure it stayed polished. She pulled out her phone and did what she did every time she took this route. She pulled up the image of Founders Hall on Metropolitan State's website. The ivy-covered building. The marble steps. The future. In 6 months, she would be walking through those doors as a student, not as a supplicant. In 6 months, everything would be different. The bus moved steadily forward, crossing streets, turning corners. Miracle was so focused on the image on her screen that she almost missed the first signs of the weather changing. A sudden gust of wind rocked the bus. Passengers looked up. A woman next to her muttered something under her breath. A prayer or a curse, Miracle couldn't tell. She checked her watch, 9:50 a.m. 10 more blocks. 50 minutes. She was going to make it. Then the sky changed. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't a slow darkening or a gentle mist. The clouds that had seemed so distant just minutes before suddenly opened with an almost biblical violence. Rain hit the windows, so hard it sounded like gravel. Within seconds, the streets were rivers. Within moments, visibility dropped to nothing. The bus driver swore quietly and slowed down. Around Miracle, passengers gripped the poles tighter. An elderly woman made the sign of the cross. A young man with headphones pulled them off, suddenly aware that something had shifted. Miracle's stomach tightened. She checked her watch again, 9:55 a.m. They were moving too slowly. The bus that should have taken 20 minutes was going to take 30, maybe 40. She did the math in her head, and the numbers didn't add up anymore. Ample time was evaporating as fast as the streets were flooding. The bus pulled up to the next stop, and Miracle stood, moving toward the door. Several other passengers got off with her, all of them hunched against the rain, all of them moving quickly. She was only 10 blocks from the university now. She could run it. She checked the time one more time, 9:58 a.m., and then she ran. The rain was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't water, it was punishment. It was ice-cold needles driven by wind that seemed to come from every direction at once. Her emerald blazer, which had looked so carefully pressed and perfect just an hour ago, was already clinging to her back, heavy and dark with water. Miracle ran with her portfolio held tight to her chest, protecting it from the downpour. Her shoes, modest black flats that her mother had bought her specifically for this day, soaked through immediately. The water was so cold it felt like fire. She dodged around people, her cornrows coming loose, wet strands escaping and whipping against her face. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The university was closed. She could see the outline of the buildings through the rain. She was going to make it. She had to make it. She was halfway there, maybe closer, when she saw the car. It was pulled awkwardly onto the curb, hazard lights blinking uselessly against the downpour. A dark sedan, expensive-looking, the kind of car that belonged in a parking garage, not on a street being battered by a summer storm. And next to it stood a man. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, with silver hair that was plastered to his head. He wore an expensive wool coat, now sodden and dark. He was standing in the rain and the wind, struggling with a car jack that wouldn't hold, wrestling with a tire that refused to cooperate. His face was a mask of frustration and something else, defeat maybe. The tire was completely flat. A gaping, useless thing sitting on the wet pavement. Miracle didn't slow. Her mind screamed the words she had heard 1,000 times. Keep moving. You're late. This is not your problem. This is your life. You're one shot. No one else was stopping. People hurried past with their heads down, lost in their own storms, their own destinations more important than one man's problem. She was 10 steps past him when she felt it. The brass keychain in her pocket seemed to pulse with weight. Do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Miracle slowed. Then she stopped. She stood frozen in the rain, water streaming down her face, her perfect blazer ruined, her hair falling apart, her future slipping away with every second she wasn't moving forward. The man looked up, startled, noticing her for the first time. "Sir," she called out, her voice thin against the wind. "Do you need help?" He stared at her, a soaking wet 18-year-old girl, clutching a portfolio, dressed like she was going somewhere important. His expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been shame. "Young lady, you should be indoors," he said, shouting to be heard over the storm. "I can't get this jack to hold. The ground's too slick." Miracle checked her watch one last time. 10:04 a.m. She had 56 minutes. The university was maybe 5 blocks away. If she left now, she could still make it, even if it was close. This was her decision point. This was where she chose. She looked at the man's defeated face. She looked at his shaking hands. She looked at the flat tire that was stranding him on a rain-soaked street in the middle of nowhere. "Screw it," she whispered to the wind. She crossed the small stream of water running along the curb and walked toward the car. Her shoes squelched in the grease and grime around the tire. She set her portfolio carefully on the back seat of his car, praying the leather would protect it. Then she knelt down on the wet, gritty pavement, the cold soaking through the knees of her slacks immediately. "You have to brace it," she said, her voice suddenly firm and sure. "The jack has to be on the frame, not on the body. Here, let me show you." The man watched, stunned, as this drenched teenager took the jack from his hands and repositioned it with practiced efficiency. She had learned this in Westfield, watching her neighbor, Mr. Washington, fix cars in the alley behind their building. You learned to fix things, or you didn't go anywhere. That was how it worked in neighborhoods like hers. "Where did you learn to do that?" the man asked, holding a useless umbrella over her head as if it might protect her from the rain and grime she was already covered in. "Westfield," she said, not looking up. "You learn to fix things, or you don't go anywhere." She worked quickly, her hands stiff with cold, her entire body shaking. The rain hammered against her back. Her blazer was beyond saving. The perfect creases her mother had pressed into her slacks were gone, replaced by damp, clinging fabric stained with grease and dirt. She didn't care. There was a job to do, and she was going to finish it. The spare tire went on. The lug nuts were tightened. She lowered the jack and stood up, her knees aching, her hands black with grease and road grime. She had been there for exactly 25 minutes. When she checked her watch, it read 10:29 a.m. Miracle is now 25 minutes behind schedule. Her whole future is literally slipping away as she stands on that rain-soaked street. This is the moment that defines everything. Here's my question for you. If you were Miracle, would you have stopped? Would you have sacrificed your future for a stranger? I really want to know. Comment below and tell me yes or no, and why. Because here's the thing, your answer reveals something important about your own character. And if you're the kind of person who would stop, then subscribe right now because you need to see how this story ends. I promise you, it's not what you think. She was still standing there, covered in grease, her dream in tatters, when the man opened his car door. "Get in," he said. His voice was quiet but firm. "I'll take you to your interview." Miracle looked at her ruined blazer, her muddy shoes, and her hands. "I can't. I'm a mess. I'll ruin your car." "I've seen worse," he said. "And my driver's out sick. I've made you late. It's the least I can do." She got in, perching on the very edge of the leather seat, dripping water onto the floor mat. The car was warm. It smelled like expensive wood and leather and things she couldn't name. They drove through the rain in silence, the windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. "Founders Hall?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." When they pulled up in front of the university, the clock on the dashboard read 11:02 a.m. Miracle grabbed her portfolio and thanked him again, her voice barely audible. She ran up the marble steps without looking back, her soaked shoes squeaking against the stone. Behind her, in the car, the man watched her disappear into the building. He had no way of knowing, as he pulled away from the curb, that the girl he had just helped was applying for the scholarship his company had founded. He had no way of knowing that she was already 7 minutes late. He had no way of knowing that those 7 minutes would change both their lives forever. All he knew was that she had stopped. When everyone else kept walking, she had stopped. Inside Founders Hall, Miracle stood in the entryway, water pooling at her feet. The silence was disorienting after the roar of the storm. The marble floor gleamed under the soft golden light of the chandeliers. The ceiling stretched 2 stories above her head, painted with elaborate murals of scholars and philosophers. The air smelled of lemon polish and old books, the scent of institutions and money. A woman sat behind an imposing mahogany desk at the far end of the lobby. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, her hair pulled back in a flawless bun. She looked up as Miracle entered, and her expression changed immediately, from polite indifference to something cold and sharp. The woman's eyes traveled slowly from Miracle's soaking, half-undone cornrows down to her grease-stained emerald blazer, past the muddy slacks clinging to her legs, and finally to the puddle forming on the pristine marble floor beneath her ruined shoes. "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was as cold as the rain outside. Miracle tried to steady her breathing. She wiped a wet strand of hair from her face, leaving a streak of black grease on her cheek without realizing it. I'm here for the TechVision Scholarship interview. My name is Miracle Johnson. My appointment was for 11 o'clock. The woman, her nameplate read Victoria Mark, Foundation Administrator, looked at the large, ornate clock on the wall. Its hands pointed to 11:04. "It is 11:04 a.m., Miss Johnson." Each word was enunciated with surgical precision. "I know. I'm so sorry." Miracle's voice cracked. "The storm. The bus was too crowded, and I had to run, and then there was this man. He had a flat tire, and no one was stopping to help him, and I." Ms. Mark held up a single pale hand, silencing her mid-sentence. "Miss Johnson, the TechVision Foundation values 2 things above all: excellence and punctuality. Punctuality is not merely a courtesy. It is a reflection of respect, preparation, and commitment." "Please," Miracle said, her voice breaking. "I'm here now. I can explain." "The 11 o'clock interview slot has passed," Ms. Mark said, her thin smile as sharp as a blade. "The panel has already moved on to the 11:15 candidate. I'm afraid you have missed your opportunity." The words hit Miracle like a physical blow. Missed her opportunity. The phrase echoed in her head, each repetition making it more real, more final. "But I did the right thing," Miracle whispered, more to herself than to the woman at the desk. Ms. Mark's expression didn't change. "That may be so, Miss Johnson. But the right thing did not get you to your interview on time. We have a very long list of qualified candidates who managed to arrive punctually. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave. You're dripping on the floor." A door opened down the hallway. A young woman in a crisp private school uniform walked out, smiling confidently. A moment later, another candidate, a young man in an expensive suit that had never seen the inside of a consignment shop, walked in. Miracle stood there for one more second, frozen in her humiliation. She could feel the stares of other students waiting in the lobby. Their eyes were carefully neutral, but their judgment was palpable. She was the problem. She was the girl who didn't belong. She turned, her wet shoes squeaking against the marble, and walked back out through the heavy oak doors. Back into the rain. The rain had not stopped. If anything, it seemed heavier now, as if the sky had decided to mock her failure. Miracle stood on the marble steps of Founders Hall, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. The cold from her wet clothes had seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill in her chest. She had failed. It was a simple, brutal fact. She had failed her mother. She had failed herself. She had failed everyone who had ever believed in her. She looked down at her hands. They were still covered in black grease and road grime. The rain was washing some of it away, creating small dirty rivers that ran down her wrists and disappeared into the sleeves of her ruined blazer. She could see her reflection in the dark glass of the oak doors, a ghost of a girl. Her cornrows were a tangled, wet mess. The dirt streak on her cheek looked like a scar. The sharp, serious person she had tried to be this morning was gone. In her place was a wet, dirty girl from Westfield. A janitor's daughter who had been foolish enough to think she could be more. Ms. Mark had been right. She was just dripping on their perfect floor. Miracle pulled the brass keychain from her pocket. It was still there, still engraved with those 5 words. "Do the right thing, even when no one is watching." "A lot of good that did me, Grandma," she whispered to the empty air. Her voice broke on the last word. She took a breath and forced her legs to move. She walked down the steps one by one, each step feeling heavier than the last. There was no point in running now. Her future was gone. The crosstown bus stop was just a block away. Miracle huddled under the small plastic shelter, but the wind whipped the rain in sideways, soaking her all over again. Other students waited too, dressed in expensive raincoats and carrying Metropolitan State University book bags. They glanced at her, then quickly looked away, their faces carefully blank. They didn't want to see her. She was a problem. She was a failure. When the bus finally arrived, it was warm inside. The heat hit her cold skin and made her itch. She fumbled in her pocket for her bus pass, her fingers stiff and clumsy. She found a seat in the back by the window. The vinyl was cracked, but it was dry. She stared out the window, watching the beautiful ivy-covered campus slide by. She had dreamed of walking these paths. She had imagined sitting in those libraries, her head full of new ideas, her future bright and limitless. Now she was just watching it disappear. The bus crossed the Westfield Bridge. The world outside the window changed. The glass and steel gave way to brick and plywood. The green lawns became patches of muddy grass and concrete. The people on the sidewalks no longer carried leather briefcases. They carried plastic shopping bags and tired expressions. She was home. The shame was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on her chest. How could she face her mother? Margaret had woken up at 4:30 a.m. to make her breakfast. 2 eggs scrambled and a piece of toast with the last of the strawberry jam. For energy, she'd said. Margaret had probably skipped her own breakfast to make sure Miracle had enough. Margaret had spent 3 weeks searching for that blazer. She had paid $18 for it. $18 that should have gone to the electric bill. She had spent 2 evenings hemming it to fit perfectly. Miracle felt tears mix with the rain on her face. She wiped them away, leaving another streak of grime. She got off the bus 3 blocks from her apartment. The rain was finally slowing to a miserable drizzle. The sky was the color of cement. Their building was old. The lobby smelled of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs. The elevator had been broken for 8 months. She stood outside her apartment door for C. She could hear the small, tinny sound of the old radio her mother kept in the kitchen, playing gospel music softly. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. She couldn't do it. She couldn't face her mother. Not yet. She sat down on the floor in the hallway, right outside her own door. She pulled her knees to her chest and finally, silently, let herself cry. She cried for the scholarship, for the blazer, for the look that would be on her mother's face when she heard. She cried because she was so cold, so tired, so defeated. She cried because she had done the right thing, and it had cost her everything. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. 5 minutes. 10. Time had stopped meaning anything. The door to 4C opened. Margaret Johnson stood there. She was still in her gray work uniform, even though her shift at the Porter Building didn't start until noon on Thursdays. Her hair, the same dark, tightly coiled hair as Miracle's but showing streaks of gray, was pulled back in a simple clip. She looked at her daughter. She took in the wet hair, the ruined blazer, the grease-stained hands, the tears. Margaret didn't ask what happened. She didn't yell. She didn't say, "I told you so," or "How could you?" She just stepped into the hallway, knelt down on the dirty carpet, a carpet she had scrubbed herself more than once, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Oh, honey," Margaret whispered, her voice full of a pain that matched Miracle's. "You're freezing." She pulled Miracle to her feet and brought her inside, locking the door behind them. The apartment was small, a living room that doubled as a dining room, a tiny kitchen, one bedroom they shared, but it was spotless. Every surface was dusted. Every dish was put away. Margaret kept their small world pristine, even when the larger world was chaos. "Go," Margaret said, her voice firm now. "Get in the shower. A hot shower right now." Miracle didn't argue. She just nodded, her teeth chattering. 20 minutes later, Miracle emerged from the bathroom wrapped in her worn-out bathrobe. Her hair was clean, but still damp. She felt human again, but the dread was still there, sitting like a stone in her stomach. Margaret was in the small kitchen. She had a cup of tea waiting on the table, hot, sweet, and milky, just how Miracle liked it. There was also a plate with 2 pieces of toast, buttered and cut diagonally. Miracle sat at the small formica table. The surface was worn thin in spots, the pattern faded from years of use. Margaret sat across from her. She folded her hands on the table, her knuckles red and chapped from cleaning chemicals. "Okay," Margaret said. "Tell me." So Miracle told her. She told her about the bus, about the run in the rain, about the middle-aged man with the flat tire. She told her about the car jack, the grease, the temporary spare. She told her how she had knelt in the grit and the rain, knowing she was running late, knowing she was probably ruining everything, but unable to walk away. "He drove me there, Mom," Miracle said, her voice quiet. "He drove me right to the door. But I was still late." "How late?" Margaret asked. "4 minutes." Margaret closed her eyes for just a second, as if absorbing a physical blow. "And the woman at the desk, Ms. Mark, she wouldn't let me in. She said my time was over. She said," Miracle's voice dropped to a whisper, "she said I was dripping on the floor." Margaret stared at her hands. "I ruined the blazer, Mom." Miracle whispered the final confession. "I'm so sorry. I ruined it." For a long time, the only sound was the drip of the kitchen faucet, the gospel music playing softly on the radio, and the rain still pattering against the window. Finally, Margaret looked up. Her eyes were not angry. They were something else, something Miracle couldn't quite read. "You stopped," Margaret said. "What?" "You were late. You were running in a storm. Your whole future was on the line. And you saw a stranger, a man you didn't know, in trouble, and you stopped." "Yes, I did. But I missed it, Mom. I missed everything." Margaret leaned forward. She reached out and took Miracle's clean, warm hand in her own chapped ones. "No, baby. You didn't miss everything." Margaret's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. She squeezed Miracle's hand and then released it, standing up slowly. "You did the right thing, Miracle. That is what your grandmother would have done. That is what matters." But even as she said it, something shifted in the apartment. It wasn't visible, but it was there, a weight settling over both of them. The weight of reality. The weight of consequences. What do we do now? Miracle asked quietly. The future was still a blank, terrifying wall. Margaret walked to the small window that overlooked the street below. The rain was starting to slow. Now I go to work, she said softly. I have the Graham family's mansion today. Mrs. Patterson asked me to do the library floors. They're having guests tonight. And you? She turned back to face her daughter. You're going to call the community college. We'll find a way. We always find a way. Margaret grabbed her keys and her thin coat. She paused at the door, looking at her daughter one more time. You're a good person, Miracle Johnson. Don't ever let anyone, not even some administrator in a gray suit, tell you otherwise. Then she was gone, and Miracle was alone. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The tea had gone cold in its cup. The toast had turned stale. Outside, the rain finally stopped, but the damage had already been done. Miracle opened her laptop, an old, slow machine that took 5 minutes to boot up. She went to the Metropolitan State University website first. It loaded with a beautiful video of smiling students on a sunny green lawn. Find your future, the headline read. She closed the tab without watching. She typed in Westfield Community College. The website was simple, blue and white, like a government form. She clicked on tuition. Even this, she realized with a sick feeling in her stomach, was going to be hard. There were application fees, books, bus fare. She would have to work, maybe full-time while taking night classes. The dream of Gable, of lecture halls and ivy-covered buildings and a future different from her mother's, felt like it was dissolving, turning into something grayer, something smaller, something that looked too much like the life Margaret already lived. Just as she was about to close the laptop, the mail slot in the front door clattered. She walked over slowly and picked up the small pile of envelopes. Bills for her mother, a grocery store flyer, and one thin envelope with a clear window. Her breath caught. It was addressed to Margaret Johnson. In the clear window, 2 words were visible, printed in harsh red ink. Final notice. Miracle's hands began to shake. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. She knew exactly what it was, the electric company. They had been finding a way to pay it for 3 months now, scraping together just enough each week to keep the lights on. But this notice, this was different. This was final. The scholarship wasn't just about her future. It had never just been about her future. The TechVision Scholarship came with a full scholarship that would have freed up her mother's entire paycheck. For the first time in years, they would have had breathing room. They would have had a buffer. They would have been able to pay the electric bill without choosing between it and food. Instead, Miracle had chosen to help a stranger. She placed the envelope on the kitchen table on top of the community college website and stared at it. The weight of what she had done, what her choice had cost, crashed down on her all over again. She had not just missed her interview. She had not just ruined a blazer. She had failed to save them. That evening, Margaret came home just before dark. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. Her hands smelled of industrial cleaner, and there were fresh scratches on her knuckles from polishing hardwood floors. She walked through the apartment, taking in the scene. Miracle sitting motionless at the table, the electric bill unopened in front of her, the community college website still glowing on the laptop screen. Margaret didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She could read the story in Miracle's face, in her posture, in the way she stared at nothing. She took her daughter's hand and pulled her gently up from the chair. "Come on," Margaret said softly. "Let's go sit for a minute." They moved to the small sofa in the living room, the one they'd found on the street 3 years ago with a broken leg that Mr. Washington had fixed. Miracle leaned into her mother's shoulder, and Margaret wrapped an arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing together in the small apartment. Outside, the city lights were beginning to come on, one by one, as the sun disappeared behind the buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Somewhere closer, a child cried. The sounds of Westfield, the soundtrack of their lives. "I'm sorry," Miracle whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." For what, baby? For failing. For not making it. For wasting my shot. Margaret pulled her closer. You didn't fail, Miracle. Listen to me, you didn't fail. But even Margaret's certainty couldn't fill the hole that had opened up inside Miracle. The hole where hope used to live. Across town, in the Porter Industries penthouse office on the 42nd floor, Donald Porter was having a very different evening. The dark green sedan had been pulled into the underground garage hours ago. Donald had changed out of his rain-soaked clothes and into the tailored charcoal suit he kept in his office for emergencies. He had showered in the executive bathroom, washed the grease from his hands, and tried to shake the image of that young woman from his mind. It wasn't working. He was sitting behind his desk, a massive piece of dark mahogany, when his chief of staff, Thomas, appeared in the doorway. Mr. Porter, Thomas said, his voice clipped and professional. You have the board call in 15 minutes. Donald looked at Thomas without really seeing him. Cancel it, he said. Thomas blinked. Sir, you can't. You rescheduled it twice already. Cancel it, Thomas. And then get me something. A young woman. Her name is Miracle Johnson. She was applying for the TechVision Scholarship this morning at Metropolitan State. Thomas pulled out his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. Miracle Johnson. Sir, there are thousands of Miracle Johnsons in the area. Do you have any other information? Date of birth. Address. I have no idea, Donald said, standing up and walking to the window. The city stretched out below him, 42 stories down, lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. But she was there this morning. At Gableton. Find me everything you can on who applied for the TechVision Scholarship today. Find me her. It wasn't until the next morning that Donald finally got the information he needed. Thomas had pulled the applications from the TechVision Foundation's database. 30 students had interviewed yesterday. 30 qualified candidates who had arrived on time, who had worn the right clothes, who had said the right things. But only one had caught Donald's attention in the file notes. Miracle Johnson, Thomas read aloud, standing in Donald's office. 18 years old. From Westfield. Single mother, employed in building maintenance. GPA, 4.0. Essay title, The Legacy of Duty. Donald's breath caught. He looked up sharply. Her essay. What is it about? Thomas scrolled through the digital file. It appears she wrote about her great-grandmother, who worked as a housekeeper her entire life. About the value of character and doing the right thing, even when it costs you. Thomas paused. Sir, there's a note here from the Foundation Administrator, Victoria Mark. It says the candidate was 7 minutes late and was turned away without being seen. Donald felt something inside him go very still. Get me her address, he said quietly. And get my car. I want to go to Westfield. Margaret's hands went to her mouth. She stood perfectly still, staring at the man in front of her. It took her a moment to find her voice. Mr. Porter, she whispered. I clean the Porter building. Yes, Donald said softly, a warm smile crossing his face for the first time. I know. I see you sometimes, late in the evenings, on your knees polishing the marble floors in the lobby. You always do the same corner twice. Your attention to detail is remarkable. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She had never thought of herself as remarkable. She had thought of herself as invisible, just another pair of hands, another uniform, another voice calling out, "Excuse me, ma'am," as executives hurried past her. Your daughter, Donald continued, is remarkable too. When everyone else kept walking, she stopped. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed white envelope. The gesture was simple, but the weight of it filled the room. This is the TechVision Scholarship, Donald said, placing it gently on the worn coffee table between them. A full ride to Metropolitan State University. Tuition, books, housing, everything. And it's not a scholarship based on arriving on time. It's based on who you are when no one is watching. It's based on character. Miracle stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if she looked away. But more than that, Donald continued, turning his attention to Margaret. I came here because I have a proposition for your mother. Margaret, I believe that you possess the kind of work ethic and integrity that my company's leadership team desperately needs. Margaret shook her head slowly. I don't understand. My chief operations officer, Robert Mark, is looking for an executive assistant. Someone who understands the value of hard work. Someone who leads by example. Someone with your character. He paused, letting the words settle. I'd like to offer you the position. 6-figure salary, full benefits, a company car, and the opportunity to move your family to a safer neighborhood. The words didn't make sense. They were English, but they didn't seem to connect to reality. Margaret had been a cleaner her entire adult life. She had scrubbed floors, polished windows, cleaned bathrooms. She had never had a title that began with the word executive. Margaret's voice broke. I don't have experience. You have integrity, Donald said firmly. You have proven dedication. You have raised a daughter who stops to help strangers on rain-soaked streets. That is the kind of person I want on my team. The room tilted. Margaret reached out and grabbed Miracle's hand, and they held on to each other like they were drowning. When you stopped on that rain-soaked street, Donald said to Miracle, you had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Your future was hanging by a thread. Your mother's entire financial situation rested on winning this scholarship. And you saw a stranger struggling with a flat tire, and you chose to help anyway. That was not a failing, Miracle. That is exactly the kind of character Porter Industries was founded to recognize and reward. He stood up and walked to the framed photograph on the side table. Margaret and baby Miracle, both of them smiling at the camera despite the poverty visible in every corner of the photo. I read your essay, Donald said softly. The one you wrote for your application. The legacy of duty. You wrote about your grandmother, about the importance of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, even when it costs you. That essay wasn't just words, Miracle. It was your life. It was your mother's life. It was your great-grandmother's sacrifice, lived out in real time. He turned back to face them. I've been searching for years for someone with your kind of integrity to help lead my foundation's new community outreach initiatives. Someone who understands what it means to come from nothing. Someone who knows the value of a second chance. Miracle's hand trembled in her mother's grip. The administrator who turned you away, Donald continued. Victoria Mark, she's been running my foundation based on outdated criteria. She believed that privilege was a prerequisite for character. She was wrong. I've asked her to take a leave of absence to reconsider her approach. Miracle finally looked at Donald, and there were tears streaming down her face. I'm offering you more than just the scholarship, he said. I'm offering you a paid internship at Porter Industries, working on these community outreach initiatives. You'll help other students from neighborhoods like Westfield access opportunities. Your mother will join me in the executive offices, and the two of you will finally have the breathing room you've been fighting for your entire lives. Margaret made a sound that was halfway between a cry and a laugh. She pulled Miracle close, and they embraced on their small, worn sofa in their tiny apartment in Westfield. We did it, baby, Margaret whispered into her daughter's hair. We did it. And there it is. One choice. One moment where Miracle chose character over ambition. And it changed everything, not just for her, but for her mother too. So here's my final question for you. Do you believe in this kind of redemption? Do you think that character actually does get rewarded in real life? Or do you think this is just a story? Leave your answer in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your perspective, because this is about more than just Miracle's journey. It's about what we all believe about justice, integrity, and whether doing the right thing ever actually pays off. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why character matters, then please subscribe and turn on notifications. Because I'm going to keep telling stories about real people, ordinary people, who prove that integrity is never wasted. Thank you for being here. Now scroll down and leave me that comment. 6 months later. Miracle sat in her dorm room at Metropolitan State University. The walls were decorated with posters of her favorite authors and a framed photo from her university orientation, her and her mother standing in front of Founders Hall, both of them beaming. On her desk, Next to her laptop and textbooks sat the brass keychain from her grandmother. Engraved on it, "Do the right thing, even when no one is watching." Her GPA was a perfect 4.0. She was working part-time at Porter Industries on the Community Scholarship initiatives, helping other students from neighborhoods like Westfield navigate their own paths to opportunity. She had changed 3 other lives already, young people who, like her, had the drive and the character but not the privilege. She gave them what Miracle herself had been almost denied, a chance. Her mother, Margaret Johnson, executive assistant to the chief operations officer of Porter Industries, worked in a gleaming office on the 39th floor of the Porter building. She had hired and trained 3 new administrative assistants. She wore business suits instead of cleaning uniforms. Her knuckles were still red, but from typing and writing, not from bleach and scrubbing. Margaret had enrolled in night classes to earn her associate's degree. In 2 years, she would have her diploma. After that, who knew? Donald had suggested she could move into a management role. For the first time in her life, Margaret was thinking about the future in terms of possibility instead of mere survival. They had moved out of Westfield 3 months ago. Their new neighborhood had tree-lined streets and well-maintained buildings. There were no security gates on the storefronts. The neighbors knew each other by name. Miracle attended university. Margaret worked in an office. They paid their electric bill without choosing between it and food. Donald stopped by Margaret's office occasionally, ostensibly to check on work-related matters. But really, he came to ask about Miracle's studies, to congratulate Margaret on her management of his calendar, to sit for a few moments in the company of people who had reminded him why his company existed in the first place. The 3 of them had formed an unlikely bond. A billionaire CEO, a former cleaner, and an 18-year-old scholarship student. They had nothing in common except this. They all understood the value of character. They all knew that one choice, one moment of kindness when the stakes were highest, could transform an entire future. On Miracle's desk, the brass keychain sat next to a photograph of the man with the flat tire, finally smiling as he shook hands with the girl who had stopped to help him. On the back of the photo, written in Donald's neat script, were the words, "Thank you for reminding me why I do this work." The rain had stopped. The storm had passed. And in its place, there was light, the kind earned through integrity, through sacrifice, and through the simple, radical act of stopping to help a stranger when the world screamed at you to keep walking. Outside Miracle's dorm window, the campus stretched out, ivy-covered buildings, green lawns, students hurrying between classes with their futures ahead of them. Miracle was one of them now. Not because she had been on time. Not because she had worn the right clothes or said the right things. But because she had stopped. Because she understood that character mattered more than punctuality. That integrity was worth more than a perfect schedule. That sometimes the right thing costs you everything. And that was exactly what made it the right thing. She touched the brass keychain and smiled.
Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. So, do check it out.